So thank you all for sitting through 11 wonderful presentations and still being here for me. Jumping in. Love it, hate it, or avoid it. If you are engaged in the Silmarillion fandom, you cannot escape the Kidnap family. A moniker lovingly, ironically, and resignedly adopted by fans as shorthand for the relationship of young Elrond and Elros and their captor guardians Maedhros and Maglor after the third kinslaying, quote, the last and cruelest of the slayings of elf by elf, unquote, in which the sons of Feanor attack the people of the havens of Sirion, and though victorious, suffer great loss. Alone they now remained of the sons of Feanor, for in that battle Damrod and Diriel were slain. But the folk of Sirion perished or fled away, or departed of need to join the people of Maedhros, who claimed now the lordship of all the elves of the outer lands. And yet Maedhros gained not the Silmaril, for Elwing, seeing that all was lost and her children Elros and Elrond taken captive, eluded the host of Maedhros, and with the Naglfring upon her breast, she cast herself into the sea and perished as folk thought. So have you noticed something off about the passage I just read? Very well done. This account of the third kinslaying is from the 1930 Quenta Noldorinwa, which is the first Silmarillion in the historical narrative Quenta style that Tolkien ever wrote. It's the first and the last that he ever completed right through to the end. So when Christopher Tolkien set about editing a Silmarillion for publication, he had heaps of materials from the 1950s, so after the publication of Lord of the Rings, for most of the story. But for the last chapters, texts from the 1930s were the best source he had available, meaning that he, with the assistance of Guy Gavriel Kay, had to make creative editorial choices to bring the texts in line with the later development of the Legendarium. So let's look at what happens in that passage that I just read, the 1931. The people of Sirion, who did not join or flee, join with Maedhros. Maedhros claims the lordship of the elves. And it explicitly states that people believe Elwing has died. All of this makes sense in the world of the 1930 Quenta Noldorinwa. But in the post-Lord of the Rings world, someone is missing. High King Erenion Gil-galad. This is a guy first mentioned in the 1936, 6 years later, downfall of Numenor, who went on to become an important background figure to the events of the War of the Ring. So, as you saw in Maglor's presentation, the presenter, not the character I'm going to talk about, Gil-galad was never quite integrated into the story, leaving dozens of possibilities for his story open. So I believe that Christopher Tolkien, faced with that free real estate, as we were calling it, did just like us fans do, and he got creative. So let's look at what he did. Here's the Quenta Noldorinwa alongside the published Silmarillion. So it opens similarly, and then we have an insertion. So too late, the ships of Círdan and Gil-galad, the High King, came hasting to the aid of the elves of Sirion, and Elwing was gone, and her sons. Then such few of that people as did not perish in the assault joined themselves to Gil-galad and went with him to Balar. So now we have Círdan and Gil-galad coming too late to the people to aid the people of Sirion, and the people who did not die or flee joined with Gil-galad, not Maedhros. And they told that Elros and Elrond were taken captive, but Elwing, with the Silmaril upon her breast, had cast herself into the sea. So now the loss of Elwing and the Silmaril and the captivity of her sons are indirectly reported by the survivors, which opens possibilities for uncertainty and unreliability. Thus Maedhros and Maglor gained not the jewel, but it was not lost, for Ulmo bore up Elwing out of the waves. And here we see the narrative elements have been reordered. So with the new phrase, but it was not lost, suggesting to some a closer temporal connection between loss and miraculous recovery, and perhaps Maedhros and Maglor actually witnessing it. And then what follows from here is relatively unchanged from the Quenta Noldorinwa to the published Silmarillion, Elwing's flight over the sea, her coming upon Eärendil, their fear for the deaths of their sons. But of course, it was not so. For Maglor took pity upon Elros and Elrond, and he cherished them, and love grew after between them, as little might be thought. But Maglor's heart was sick and weary with the burden of the dreadful oath. There it is. The sentence about which millions of words of transformative fiction and billions of pixels have been painted. And in a world like that of the 1930 Quenta, where Maedhros is now lord of all the elves remaining in Middle-earth, where the remnant of the Sirionites has joined with him, where Elwing is thought dead, it's not so hard to accept. There's no one else left. How catastrophic, then, that the perilous kinslayer has had a change of heart and been moved to affection for 2 orphans. But with Gil-galad and Círdan in the picture, and with greater ambiguity around who knows what, it gets complicated. We readers have questions. Did Maedhros and Maglor know the Silmaril had survived, that Elwing had survived, that Gil-galad was coming? And wouldn't Gil-galad or Círdan have been better guardians? And what does it say about Maglor that he kept them anyway? So some might say this reveals the sort of imperfections and inconsistencies arising from the editorial process that make the Silmarillion a challenging book to subject to serious literary study. I disagree. I believe it reveals exactly what makes the Silmarillion such a compelling and engaging work of literature. It is part of a storytelling tradition, a living legendarium from Tolkien, and let's not forget how heavily he was inspired by other traditions, to his son as editor, to the other minds and hands of us, the readers, interpreters, and creators. What have we created? Kidnap family. Kidnapping, according to Merriam-Webster, is to quote, seize and detain or carry away by unlawful force or fraud, and often with a demand for ransom, unquote. As we saw in that passage I just quoted, the Silmarillion does not talk about any of that with regard to Maglor and the twins. And yet the element of kidnapping, some sort of hostage situation, figures prominently in many fans' imaginings. I was curious if that element had its origins in the editorial interventions we've just seen. So I conducted a survey, which garnered a whopping 284 responses. Thank you. I gathered both quantitative and qualitative data on 1, what readers imagined the characters knew, and 2, why, given what they knew, did they act the way that they do in the story? One of the key questions to the analysis was, what do you imagine motivated Maglor and Maedhros, if you include him, more on that later, to take Elrond and Elros into his or their care? Respondents had the opportunity to select as many answers as they liked. So the top 3 reasons in green on the bar graph align well with the tone and circumstances of the Kenta Noldorinwa, because it would not have been safe to leave them. Emotional reasons, and because he or they believed no one else was left to care for them. But the 4th most common reason, quote, to use as hostages to barter for the Silmaril, can only be inferred from the events surrounding Maglor's act. As one respondent said, quote, I thought the hostage thing was canon for a while because it's so common in the fandom, but after rereading the text, I don't agree with it at all anymore, unquote. I suspected that interpretation came down to what readers believed people knew, people being characters in the story. So on the question of Gil-galad and Círdan, the majority of respondents believed Maedhros and Maglor were not aware that they were coming to the rescue, which is a perfectly plausible reading of the text. But of those who imagined that they were aware that Maedhros and Maglor were aware of the rescue, hostages is the top reason they give for Maedhros and Maglor taking the twins, 62%. And the starkest difference of opinion on the second black circle there, and on the question of no one else to care for them, 36% difference between whether they believe Gil-galad and Círdan are coming, which makes sense because Gil-galad and Círdan are other people. Now, when it comes to what people believe Maedhros and Maglor knew about what happened to the Silmaril, which I've suggested is made more ambiguous by the reordering of narrative elements in the published Silmarillion, a solid 75% of survey respondents imagined that the brothers were not aware that the Silmaril had survived. But among those who imagine they were aware of the Silmaril's recovery from the sea, the motive of hostage taking is even more common, with 67% giving this as a reason. But it's still not the top choice, as it was with the Knew About Gil-galad group. And in this question, I asked respondents what they thought the brothers should have done. Opinions were divided, as you can see from the many colors, but a majority, 56%, believed they should have left Elros and Elrond with Gil-galad and Círdan. The imaginative explanations respondents gave when asked to expand on their answer further demonstrated how Gil-galad and Círdan's presence complicates the morality of Maglor's choice in a way that isn't so stark in the 1930 Quenta. So enough of data. I'd like to shift now, although there got so much more and I'm going to share it later. It's going to take me a while. I'd like to shift now to fan works and another major issue of interpretation. Is Maedhros part of the family? So in the Silmarillion, Maglor alone takes pity upon Elrond and Elros, and yet only 18% of survey respondents did not think that Maedhros also acted as a guardian to Elrond and Elros. So let's look briefly at how some creators have interpreted the issue of Maedhros' involvement. Okay, I'm not going to have a chance to read this, but this is one of the earliest Kidnap Fam stories that I could trace that's online still. There are probably ones from before that. And Maedhros is treated quite cynically. He's suggesting taking them as hostages in that. Here we have a fan comic by Editorial, which shows an example of the found family trope that pervades many interpretations of the Kidnap family. And this is a quote from Grey Gazania's story, And They Looked Up and Saw a Star, which is one of the first fan works on Archive of Our Own to have the tag Kidnap Family. And here Maedhros himself works through some of the very same questions that we readers have. All I know is that Elwing is likely dead, and that if Círdan or Gil-galad find the Silmaril, they are more likely to be willing to trade it. But if the Silmaril is truly lost, he trailed off, glancing back at the tent with unease. I don't know what we will do with the children, only that I will not see them harmed like their uncles. But they're terrified of us, and I cannot fault them for it. So these passages are representative of dozens of fan works that I read. In all of them, we see characters from the Kidnap Quartet themselves, to Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Celeborn in Grundy's Its Glory is All Moonshine, to complete outsiders like the Easterling follower of the Feanorians and Hegets in the Camps of Four, grapple with why the sons of Feanor took and kept the sons of Elwing in their custody, and what exactly is meant by, and love grew after between them, as little might be thought. In reviewing the qualitative data from my survey, I quickly realized I made a significant omission in my list of motives, which was mentioned by at least 38 respondents in their free-form answers. That is the regret and grief surrounding Elured and Elurin, Dior's sons and Elwing's brothers, whom the Silmarillion tells us were left to die by the cruel servants of Celegorm, and whom Maedhros, repenting, could not find. You may have noticed they were mentioned in the passage I just quoted from Grey Gazania. Don't want them to end up like their uncles. Now, the symmetry of Elured and Elurin and Elros and Elrond has an interesting relationship to the editorial process as well. I'm going to go a minute over. Christopher Tolkien's guiding editorial principle seems to have been to use his father's most recently written prose narrative source whenever possible, drawing on other sources only to fill in the gaps and inconsistencies. But so much had changed around the events of the fall of Doriath that not even the 1930 Centa Noldorinwa could be repurposed. Instead, the fall of Doriath was pieced together from many drafts spanning many years. And Christopher Tolkien made the, make no mistake, creative decision to include the detail about Maedhros repenting and searching for Dior's sons. And what a difference its inclusion makes to the way one interprets and imagines both motives and the later shape of the Kidnap family. As one survey respondent wrote, quote, The idea that they would leave Elrond and Elros to an uncertain fate in a ruined city after they had already tried to find two other lost children doesn't make sense, unquote. And, quote, I cannot imagine Maedhros wouldn't have been involved in raising the children when he was the one who looked for Elured and Elurin, unquote. I would be curious to know if there's any correlation between those who see Elured and Elurin as motivating the Feanorians to take Elrond and Elros, and those who consider Maedhros as well as Maglor to have played a caregiver role in their upbringing. But that will have to be another survey. I've only been able to graze the surface of the reading I did and the data I collected, but I hope I've ignited your curiosity about the ways that Christopher Tolkien's editorial modifications to the 1930 Quenta and beyond add layers of complexity to the relationship between the Sons of Feanor and the Sons of Elwing. Buried treasures in the imaginative sandbox of a living legendarium. The tale does not stop with the published Silmarillion. It carries on as a thriving storytelling tradition in the imaginations and creations of fans of the work. And I'll leave you with a little song from Kidnap Dad Maglor and a plug. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.